What's up guys, and welcome back to TechPlan. Today I'm going to make a mini terrarium with some 3D printing. Let's check it out. So to get started we're going to need three things: the 3D printed object, the terrarium, which I'm using a spaghetti jar just for this experiment, and then we're going to need some plants to put inside the terrarium. For the 3D printed part, I designed sort of like a shelved column just so I could separate the different plants on each level, and I just want to see how this turns out. So let's get started by looking at the plants. About a year ago, I stuffed some Margravia and some peacock moss into this jar, just let it sit and do its thing, and so now I'm just going to pull some out, because we're going to use this in our new terrarium. Now that I got some of the stuff removed, I also pulled some stuff from random areas in my grow room. I've got some living sphagnum moss, a different type of Margravia, I believe this one is like El Coca Red or something close to that, some regular moss, another Margravia species, I think just a regular one, and on top of that I also have a little orchid, so we're going to see how that works. To get started on the build, I'm going to use fishing line and regular dead sphagnum moss just to build out some substrate on each layer. I need something to attach the plants to because they're not just going to grow on plain plastic, so I'm just using some clear fishing line, tying it to the edge, and then really just stuffing sphagnum moss in there and then winding the fishing line around it. This holds it in there pretty nice and gives me some string, I guess, to hook little plants to later. So a lot of times you can tuck the other plants that I'm going to add onto it underneath the fishing line. So you don't want to put it super snug, but snug enough to keep everything together. Here I just wanted to dry fit it and see how it sits in there. I actually had to melt the bottom of the 3D print just a little bit so it would sit better in the jar, because the bottom of the jar is sort of concave, if that makes any sense. So the flat thing wasn't sitting on there nicely, so I just heated it up, melted it a little bit, and pushed it in there, and it fits quite nice. I'm starting off with this really long, thin, hair-like moss. I'm really not sure what the species is. It's grown in most of my orchid pots and just random things it starts to show up in. It's not something I purposely collected from like outside or from a store. It's just come with other pots. But it's really pretty and I want to see it sort of take over. Next up, I'm going to add some of my living sphagnum moss just to some random levels to add a little bit of color and kind of seed the dead stuff. So I want this to really grow out over time, so I'm just placing little pieces here and there so they can start to take over as well. Next up is our Margravia El Coca. I want this to snake around and go across levels. So my main goal is to try and separate a lot of the plants by levels, but with this one I want it to snake around and move upwards and take over other ones because it is really beautiful. This will end up being the more pretty plant, but I'm pretty sure it's going to take a pretty long time for it to actually take over. These are pretty slow growing for me, and they take a while to get started. Here's a quick check-in at where we're at. I also extended some of that moss up to the second level because again I want to see it kind of take over the whole column and grow upwards. So I gave it 2 levels to give it a little better start, and you can also see the Margravia starting to snake up the side. I'm going to take another Margravia species. I'm not sure what this one is. I know it's a more generic one, but I'm going to run that one up the left side and a few other places, and hopefully this one with the nice green leaves competes with the red leaves and we get something beautiful in the near future. I'm using the tweezers a lot to sort of embed the roots on some of these cuttings and just the actual stems. As long as I can kind of secure it behind some of the sphagnum moss, it'll sit pretty good and start to root there. The next plant is going to be a mini orchid. I'm not really sure what the species is at the moment, but it's a very small species. I think it's a bulbophyllum one, and I really love these and I want to see how it does in here. I don't have high hopes for it though, because a lot of these orchids need a lot of airflow and they don't want to just sit in sopping wet, super humid environments without any airflow. So it might not make it, but it's time to experiment. Lastly, I'm going to put some peacock moss up towards the top. This stuff is really good at taking over everything, so that's why I don't want to start it near the bottom, because if I put it at the bottom, this whole jar will just be filled with it and you won't see anything else. But I really do love peacock moss because it has this amazing, almost like oil slick blue to the leaves. It's just really pretty in certain light, and I absolutely love it. So I like to put this in most of my little terrariums and even propagation bins because it just adds a flair. So I'm going to put it up top and it should do pretty well up there and stay put and not take over. And here it is all set up with all the plants. I really like the look and I like how the white lines break up each section. This actually reminds me a lot of some buildings in Singapore. They have a lot of pretty cool stuff like this. It's a country I definitely want to visit because they do have a lot of plant oriented buildings and other big botanical gardens. But anyways, it kind of takes the appearance of those buildings, so I really like it and I can't wait to see how this grows up. One thing I always love to do with anything I create for this channel is do a lot of macro shots. I myself personally super enjoy this stuff. I really love seeing everything up close. I love seeing the water droplets sit on things and just it's a whole new aspect that you can really admire on these plants, seeing them up this close, because it's something you can't really see normally with the naked eye. So I really enjoy this footage, and I hope you guys enjoy it too. Alright, like in a lot of my videos, I do have an update. So I started this thing in late July, and here we are at almost Christmas time. So let's take a look at how it's grown out and see if it did what I thought it would do. Looking at it from a wide shot, it is rather overgrown and looking pretty crazy, but I still think it does look pretty cool. I do see some species of plants in there that I did not put in there, so they must have come in on the substrate or something else. That hair-like moss really took over the center like I expected, but it did really grow more than everything else and took over things a little more than I expected. But I really like the look, and it gives the column a really cool fuzzy feeling, so I do like it. The Markgravia really didn't do what I expected it to do. Maybe the dark lid kept enough light from getting in there and it didn't really take off, because I've had some other cuttings that got some really large leaves when growing up something, so I'm surprised it didn't do much. It's all still pretty healthy and looking good, so I'll leave it and see what it does. I might take it out in the future for another build, but I really like this column look and I want to experiment more with this. I think it turned out pretty good for my first 3D printed experiment, and I've got some much larger gallon jars with some other cool ideas. So I hope you guys like this stuff, because there's going to be a lot more coming. But overall, for my first try, I think it turned out pretty good and the growth is pretty nice. We did lose some of the orchid leaves like I assumed, but we'll see if it can start pulling through and adjust to this new environment. Well guys, that pretty much sums up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a small 3D printing / terrarium experiment. I definitely have some more ideas, better ideas, and some really cool stuff to explore with the 3D printer and terrarium design. There's a lot of cool like auto watering moss walls I want to build. There's just some really cool stuff. So I hope you guys enjoyed this and you look forward to more. And as always, may your plants grow strong and healthy. I'll see you next time.